We're going to get into the reading. Dr. Bobby E. Wright, The Psychopathic Racial Personality and Other Essays. And so we're starting from the first chapter, first page, The Psychopathic Racial Personality. For those who want to follow along with this, there should be a link for you. Just tap on that link.
I don't think we put a link for that in the chat.
No.
So if we can go ahead and put that link for them in the chat, that would be good.
Okay. Do we need that link? I'm on my phone, so I can't get it. It should be in the chat, though, but
it'll be put in the chat.
We'll try to get that to you as soon as possible, but we're going to jump right into the reading. So, psychopathic racial personality. In a bullfight, after being brutalized while making innumerable charges at the movement of a cape, there comes a time when the bull finally turns and faces his adversary, with the only movement being his heaving bloody sides. It is believed that for the first time, he really sees the matador. This final confrontation is known as the moment of truth. For the bull, this moment comes too late. The experience of Black people all over the world presents an analogous situation. For hundreds of years, Blacks have been charging at the banners that are held by the European white matadors. Those banners have been represented by concepts such as democracy, capitalism, Marxism, religion, and education. The banners remain constant as long as Blacks were assets. However, with technology and worldwide industrialization on the rampage, resulting in the further exploitation of Africa's resources, which in turn produces an increase in Africa's and Blacks' national consciousness, Blacks are now a threat and a liability to the white race. Therefore, the banner held by the matador represents only one concept: genocide. As a consequence, the major research that white scientists are involved in today is genocidal in nature. Nuclear warfare, population control, medication control, genetic engineering, psychosurgery, electrical stimulation of the brain, and the highly complex science of behavioral technology. Indeed, it is Blacks' moment of truth. It is time for Blacks to look at the matador. This presentation is based upon the following very simple premise. In their relationship with the Black race, Europeans or whites are psychopaths, and their behavior reflects an underlying biologically transmitted proclivity with roots deep in their evolutionary history. The psychopath is an individual who is constantly in conflict with other persons or groups. He is unable to experience guilt, is completely selfish and callous, and has a total disregard for the rights of others. This premise is supported by overwhelming scientific evidence. I mean, scientific evidence, historical evidence, all types of evidence is out there in regards to this relationship. But just to go back, just want to stop for a second. He talks about, Dr. Bobby Wright is talking about the banner that's being waved, right? Well, he uses the bull analogy, right? In this moment of truth. And he's using that as an analogy to describe the experience or the relationship between African people and Europeans. And it's interesting, the matador, when he talks about the banners, he says democracy, capitalism, Marxism, religion, and education. This is what's been used, right, to keep us distracted, to keep us focused. We've been looking at, we've been looking at these different concepts, being distracted by these different ideas that the European has presented, not understanding, what the true problem is. So all we have to do is look at the enemy, the person who's holding up these ideas and concepts that's constantly coming to us talking about democracy. All of this hypocrisy that they're talking about, right? These ideas of capitalism. Do this and you can liberate yourself. Understand Marxism and you can liberate yourself. But the fact is that the European, the one is a material, relationship that we have with the European. and he's using these ideas to keep us confused. So, I'm just looking at these distractions. I wonder what your thoughts are on it, but I think it's important. One of the things to take away from this is understanding, like not getting caught up in these different theories and ideas, because sometimes we lose time. We lose time debating on strategy and problem when innately we see the problem every day. We understand what the problem is. And there's another. So the last point, he talks about the matador. Now the banner represents only one concept: genocide. Right. So that's powerful. And he gets into all of the changes that are taking place with industrialization. There's no need for the African anymore. Before we needed to be distracted. We needed to be confused and controlled in order for them to continue to oppress and exploit us. So as long as we debating and fighting over ideas and so forth, they can continue to exploit us. But now with the technology and industrialization, AI and all of these things, do we really need the African anymore? And so this goes back to what he talks about with menticide. And we had this conversation before in one of our spaces. We were talking about menticide. And menticide is the deliberate destruction of the mind, of a person's mind. So it's the deliberate destruction of the African mind with the objective of extirpation. That's what Dr. Bobby Wright says, to eliminate African people altogether. And so that's the point we're at now, is where our actions, mental-cital actions, when we talk about the violence that is committed in our community against each other, that's mental-cital behavior. Where is that coming from, right? And when there's nothing done about it, it's because the idea is for those people to for us to wipe ourselves out so that they can come in and just gentrify our communities. And I'm gonna stop here because I know you got some stuff to say, but it's a lot.
I think definitely just to even add on to that, right? When we think about all of the ways in which genocide can happen, right? One of the things I know that we talk about is ethnic cleansing. When we talk about gentrification, we don't refer to it as gentrification. We refer to it as ethnic cleansing because of the systematic way in which it's being done. And when we think about even the ways in which you could wage war upon a people, through the medicine, through the food, through the education system, menticide, what you're talking about. So all of these ways we know that we're being attacked, and it goes to his point, right? Yeah. So, that white, and we're not looking at it that way. We're still looking at it, right? When he talks about the banner, that being held up as, democracy, capitalism, Marxism, religion, education, we're still looking at the banner as that and not as genocide. And he's talking about this, and he's talking about this like 30 years ago. He's talking about it as genocide. But today we're still looking at the other banners as really what America, but also these other European countries around the world because they're still interconnected in that specific kind of way when it comes to the outcomes of what the world is to look like. Europeans are still deciding what the world is to look like, what the future is to look like. And so when we're thinking about these banners and that he brings up, we're still looking at those as that and not really understanding that all of the things that he then mentions here when he talks about the banner as being genocide. And so, white scientists, they are looking at currently, and we know this, nuclear warfare, population control, as huge as it is. When we think about Bill Gates, people still trusting Bill Gates, even looking at him as an authority on anything. I mean, when we know the research has been done to what he's done in Africa, what he's done in Haiti. I mean, the whole foundation, right? His whole Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is still looked upon as a go-to place, right? That is doing right in the world. Medication control, like he talks about, genetic engineering. We know that's happening. I mean, now we have foods that are GMOs, and we know what GMOs do to you. So all of this stuff that he's talking about, it's literally right in our face. But we still, for some reason, think we're fighting for democracy. And not that we should be fighting for democracy and not for our survival as a people. Democracy is not going to bring you, and especially the democracy they're talking about. That's not even, democracy. Let's even think about that concept of democracy, because when they throw it out there, they're talking about a particular one that you're not necessarily talking about. So yeah, those, that's what I would add on to what you were saying, because I completely agree.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to get into more. We need to do a 3 hour. We're gonna do a whole episode on just this book, so we can have some time to really get into it. I'm gonna just go to the next paragraph. I'm on page 2, the second paragraph. There is scientific dictum which states everything that exists in some amount, and if it exists, it can be measured. One of the best methods that can be used to measure the psychopathic traits of the white race is observing and analyzing their universal overt behaviors and attitudes towards blacks. However, in doing, since blacks have been enslaved and colonized by whites, a very subtle psychological problem is posed, of which every black should be aware. Intellectual insight about whites does not ensure that there will be a corresponding change in blacks' behavior and attitude toward whites, particularly when there is a threat involved. For example, everywhere one finds whites and blacks in close proximity to each other, whether it is Chicago or Zimbabwe, the whites are in control. Yet, blacks rarely question this extraordinary universal phenomenon which defies every known statistical law of probability. In fact, blacks denounce those who simply raise this question with admonitions such as, we should not be racist, and treat them as they have treated us. In fact, whites are not going to allow blacks to treat them as they have treated blacks, so that requires no discussion. However, the subject of black racism should be discussed. A functional definition of racism could be the oppression and exploitation of people because of their race. Using this definition, it is very clear that at this point in time, blacks cannot be racist because of their lack of power to oppress anybody. Black intellectual enlightenment does not always lead to genuine insight, and it can be very damaging to the intellect as reflected by the behavior and attitudes of many eminent black scientists. For example, Dr. Kenneth B. Clark has spent his life making a fortune studying the victims of white oppression, his own people, and now speak of the irrelevancy of color. Dr. Alvin Poussaint, who seems to be Johnson Publishing Company's psychiatrist in residence, ignores the widespread genocidal programs directed against blacks and writes such trivia as the difference between sex and love, blacks and Jews, and the appeal for unity, and why blacks kill blacks. I'm gonna read one more paragraph. Blacks kill blacks because they have never been trained to kill whites. Therefore, it is outside their experience. Historically, the European system has encouraged the killing of blacks. But because blacks have been led to believe that they are part of the psychopath system, they simply follow the practice. Dr. James Comer is another black psychiatrist whom the psychopaths have so overwhelmed that he has moved, as his book suggests, beyond black and white. Cobbs and Greer follow this tradition of blacks studying themselves rather than their oppressors by concluding in Black Rage that whites make blacks so mad that they kill themselves. Oh, man.
That's a lot. That's a lot there. I know.
Yeah, I was trying to think where to begin.
I think even for me, like, one of the things I think is important about the book and thinking about all of the things that he brings up is the paragraph at the beginning of page 2. I mean, the second paragraph at the beginning of page 2, where it says, this presentation is based upon the following very simple premise in their relationship with black race. Europeans, whites are psychopaths when it comes to their relationship with black people. and their behavior reflects an underlying biologically transmitted productive proclivity with roots deep in their evolutionary history. The psychopath is an individual who is constantly in conflict with other groups or persons. He is unable to experience guilt, is completely selfish and callous, and has a total disregard for the rights of others. This premise is supported by overwhelmingly scientific evidence. And he, so I think that his premise that he's bringing up is really important to think about, because then he, I think he talks about and I think it's, I don't know if it's in this section or he goes later to talk about how like a psychopath, they can interact in a way that you would never know. And he talked about how like most psychopaths live their lives and you would never know that they're a psychopath. And when he talks about how the acts, right, how one is in constant fighting and in constant conflict with groups and persons, and that they are unable to experience guilt, selfish and callous, and is a complete disregard for the rights of others. When we think about the relationship that white people and black people have had, the way that, white people have interacted with black people, everything that he's saying here is what we see when he talks about there's overwhelming evidence. Even today, when you look at what is happening today, it's those same things. The complete disregard for the rights, for your rights, the constant conflict when it comes to everything. Every area of our lives is in constant conflict with a white supremacist institution or a white supremacist, what's the word I'm looking for? Barrier. Because every area of our lives, we're in constant conflict, whether you're going to work and you have to deal with the people who are at your job that with microaggressions and racism and all this other stuff. When you go into school, and that's a constant conflict with teachers. And, we talked about last week, and now it's happened. And and there's some stuff that has happened in New York around the ethnic studies, AP African-American studies courses. Like everything is always in constant conflict. For you to get everything is a conflict for Black people within this white system and dealing with it. We're talking about police, murdering Black people, all of that. So I think that his analysis and his premise that he raises here is something to really think about in terms of the way that we have historically seen whites interact with Black people, but also currently.
Yeah, just to build on that, going back to that that paragraph that you read, the first paragraph on page 2, one of the thoughts that elicited was how Black people, we need to be diagnosing the European. They can't diagnose themselves, and this is what a Black social theory. This is why it's so significant, because now, when we're looking at this relationship, not through the gaze of the European, we can critique the behavior. We can define the behavior through our experiences as African people. The European he's not going to indict himself. He's not going to diagnose his behavior as being psychopathic, because he benefits from the behavior. He doesn't. He's not going to. What's the word? He's biased. He's biased, right? But the African can look at that, and we can define, which we should be doing, defining the relationship and defining our oppressor and their behavior on us. So that, I think that was a good point right there. And so, yeah, if we call, the psychopaths, racism is a mental disease. Now, we can talk about, these people need help. We need to get away from these people. We can start having those conversations. Who wants to integrate with a psychopath? Who wants to be a part of a system with that is being ran by psychopaths? Nobody, right? But we're not having that conversation. And I'll just go to the last one. I know we're at the top of the hour. The last paragraph, he talked about the racism too, but just going into the last paragraph, and there was a point also made in the comments about us looking at or diagnosing our problems and looking at the world through, again, the white gaze and the white experience, which we can't do. We can never get that right, because just like they can't be in our shoes, we can't be in their shoes. These are two different worlds. There's a human experience, but the experiences for people are different, depending on where they are in that power relationship. And so when we have these apologists for the system of colonialism, capitalism, such as Dr. Kenneth B. Clark, and I think that was a great point he talked about. He spent his life making a fortune studying the victims of white oppression and his own people, white oppression on his own people. And now he speaks of the irrelevancy of color. How can you study this stuff all your life and now you're just like, color is irrelevant, right? After making money off of this. But that's what capitalism does too. You begin, once you're able to benefit from the system, you start you become quote unquote colorblind, right? And then you become this person who says, hey, I was able to make it. If I can do it in this system, then, anybody else can do it. So, I just wanted to point out that contradiction, because that goes all the way back to the conversation I had before about the, sort of this buffer in the Black community that goes back to even slavery, where there was opportunities, quote unquote, opportunities for Black people within the system where they're able to become even slave masters in the system, where they can own slaves, right? They can own property. And so because there was a few Blacks that can do that, it blinds, or let's say it sort of deludes the masses of African people to thinking that the system could work. All we have to do is just act a particular way and think a particular way. And so now, we look to try to speak as proper as possible. We look to go to the most distinguished schools. So I'll leave it there. I know we're past the hour, but wanted to see if you had any last thoughts too.
I think my final thoughts on this is going back to, I think what's currently still in the news, even though I'm, haven't been following it much. So relates to, what might be on people's minds. And so I'll just point out two things, and then we'll, and those will be my final thoughts. So I think one, when we're talking about here, right, about this premise that he makes about in their relationship with the Black race, Europeans are psychopaths. And where he says, like, people, he says, like, in fact, Blacks denounce those who simply raise the question of, like, oh, why do, white people have to, why is it in the area where there are majority Black people that whites run everything, and that if somebody was to bring this question up, that they would be admonished for it, right, and denounced. And so I think also in this premise, I think people would do the same thing, right, with this premise that he brings up. So I think I would like for, even people who watch the replay to talk about what do they think about this premise that he's bringing forward, right? Because I think that is something that we have to, really think about and think through as he's talking about. There's like countless of examples of what he's talking about, but still I say that, just as people would be admonished for, questioning why is it that in an all Black area you still have non-Blacks being the ones who run whether it's whether it's in politics or in business. And then I think the other part, the last thing I'll say is when it comes to, what's currently going on within, I think, the conversation that's still in the media about the cops having killed the Black guy, and thinking about this paragraph. I mean, thinking about that makes me think about this particular paragraph that he talks about, that Blacks kill Blacks because they have never been trained to kill whites. Therefore, it is outside their experience. Historically, the European system has encouraged the killing of Blacks. Because Blacks have been led to believe that they are part of the psychopathic system, they simply follow the practice. And so I think that is key to thinking around what, those Black cops and the way in which they interacted with and killed that brother last week.
Yeah, Ashe. And we're going to continue to build on it, because that was mental-suicidal behavior that we witnessed with those police officers. And so this is what we have to understand. Start using this language too, call it out, this mental-suicidal behavior. And these are Africans who need help. We have a lot of Africans who are, behaving in a genocidal way as a result of this type of thinking. So with that being said, man, I want to appreciate all you guys for sticking in, being a part of this conversation. Glad you was here with us. Continue to, share this program as we continue to have these discussions. Want to introduce different books and ideas to you guys. A lot of people haven't been exposed to Dr. Bobby E. Wright. So hopefully, we're able to expose more and more people to these ideas. So with that being said, make sure you visit the website again, wechargecolonialism.org. Apply for the Black Power Fund if you're qualified. And, we'll build with you guys next week. So peace.